I'm going to have you start off by pausing the video, reading this question, and unpausing the video. Okay, so I want to be able to write my own null hypothesis and my own alternative hypothesis. Because we're in 10.2 and we're talking about population proportion, I'm going to use P in both cases. So analyzing what that null hypothesis is, and then whether it's just not equal to, it's greater than, or it's less than. So they say 46% of all Americans said protecting the right to own guns is more important. So the null hypothesis is that P is equal to 0.46. And what we are analyzing is, does this result suggest the proportion of Americans with at least a bachelor's degree feel differently than the general American population? So, feel differently does not specify greater than or less than. It simply means does not equal to. So I'm going to use my null hypothesis and my alternative hypothesis. I'm going to use the problem to find X and N, and then they also give me a level of significance to compare it to. So stat, tests, one proportion z-test, P0 from my null hypothesis, in this case is 0.46. X comes from the problem, 559 out of 1267. X needs to be smaller because you can't have more people than what's in your sample. So 559 out of 1267, and I want it to not be equal to. So again, whether you hit calculate or draw makes no difference, but you're looking at, the proportions of both greater than or less than, that kind of idea. So what I arrive at, what I like, is that P, different P value, so lots of P's here. The P value that we're analyzing is 0.1794. And I'm comparing that to my level of significance of 0.1. So since that is greater than 0.1, do you remember? Do not reject. So let's interpret what that means. Do you remember? If not, let's scroll back up. So do not reject the null hypothesis means there is not enough evidence to accept the claim of H1. So there is not enough evidence to support that the proportion of Americans with at least a bachelor's degree feel differently than the general American population when it comes to gun control. It says, note the difference between not rejecting and accepting. We are simply saying that there is not enough evidence to accept the claim of H1. We are not accepting the null hypothesis. It could be different than 0.46. We don't have enough evidence to conclude that, is what that note there means. So this practice problem here, pause the video, read the problem, see if you can come up with the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. See if you can come up with alpha on your own, and we'll go through the problem whenever you unpause me. Okay, so what I look at from this problem, this original proportion is 0.37. So the null hypothesis is that P is equal to 0.37. And then they say that they just want to see if the proportion of teens who text while driving has changed. So they don't say that it's changed in one direction or the other. They just say has changed. So it does not equal 0.37. And then this 95% confidence interval is another way of saying that alpha is 0.05. So when I run my numbers, stat, tests, one proportion, I've got P sub 0 is 0.37. I've got X is 272. I've got N is 800. I've got does not equal, and again, you can hit calculate or draw. You'll arrive at the same conclusion. In this case, P is 0.0788. So I'm comparing that to 0.05. So 7.8% compared to 5% is greater than, so I do not reject. So I do not reject the null hypothesis, which means you need to scroll back up here, you can, to put it in the words. Do not reject the null hypothesis means there's not enough evidence to accept the claim of the alternative hypothesis. There is not enough evidence to accept the conclusion that the proportion of 16 to 17-year-olds who text while driving has changed since 2007. There is not enough evidence to support it. So that's it. I'll do this last problem if you feel like you want the practice. But otherwise, I think you can go to the homework. I don't know if this one's different or not. I don't think so, though. But if you want to try this problem, you can pause me and we can finish this, but I think you might be okay. Okay, so they say 48.9%, so heat equals 0.489. And the the alternative hypothesis, the percentage has increased, which means P is greater than 0.489. So I'm going to run my numbers. .489. X is 21 of them out of the 35. And I want specifically that it increased. I can do calculate or draw. I get the same, it'll tell me the p-value in this case is 0.0945, which, how does that compare to 0.1? It is less than, which means we reject the null hypothesis. So rejecting the null hypothesis, interpreted into words, means to accept the alternative. So there is enough information, there is enough evidence to conclude that the proportion of males 20 to 39 who consume the recommended dose of calcium has increased.